Hello, my name is Dr. Roisin Lyons and I am an Associate Professor of Entrepreneurship and Innovation in the Chemie Business School in the University of Limerick. And I will be speaking to you today about the effect of corruption on entrepreneurship and business activities. So when we think about entrepreneurship as a field, we can define it as the creation of something new with value, and it involves the devotion of the necessary time and effort, assuming the accompanying financial, psychic and social risks, and receiving the resulting rewards of monetary and personal satisfaction and independence. While there are many definitions for the entrepreneurship domain, this one in particular notes that there are consequences and benefits to the role of the entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship and corruption have been widely studied, particularly in the last decade, and the popularity of this area of research is growing over time. Now, why it is so important to consider corruption in terms of its effect on entrepreneurship is because when we consider those that are trying to start a company and engage in entrepreneurship, there are many different stakeholders involved in that ecosystem. There are influences in terms of the market that the entrepreneur chooses to enter, the financial capital and the financial supports around them, educational supports, labour, networks, many, many more. There can exist corruption in many of these, namely those that are related to government. And when these are corrupt or there are inconsistencies in this support, it can damage the entrepreneurial ecosystem, thereby damaging the chances of an entrepreneur to succeed in their context. When we talk about entrepreneurship, and when we study it in academic research, we usually study it in terms of entrepreneurial intentions. Now, an intention is a commitment to act or a motivation to act. You intend to do something. And usually when we study entrepreneurial intentions, it gives us a clear indication of how many actors, how many entrepreneurs are going to enter the industry. So when we examine intentions, we use a number of different theories, namely the theory of planned behavior or Shapiro's entrepreneurial event. Historically, have been two of the most popular. And while they differ on the main factors and they differ in some regards, they do all contend that when someone has a favourable appraisal of the specified behavior in entrepreneurship, starting a company, if they think that they have some control over this and that the outcome will be favorable, they're more likely to engage in entrepreneurship, thereby saying that their entrepreneurial intentions are higher. So we look at intentions across the world, namely in a report called the Global Entrepreneurial Monitor Report, the GEM report that is published biannually, and it gives us a sense of how likely it is to have entrepreneurs in each country, what the motivations of people in those countries are towards entrepreneurship. And this is the metric we often use to see if there is barriers to entrepreneurship or things that might be bolstering entrepreneurship in an area or scaring people away from the career choice to an extent. So bringing those things together with corruption, it has been found that corruption reduces economic growth, it lowers investment, and it erodes trust in government officials. So these compile to create a pretty unattractive institutional environment for startups. You know, they create a perception in the eyes of the potential entrepreneur that this context may be unfair, favorable, may be unfair, and may be less supportive for entrepreneurship. So as a result, when they see that there is potential corruption, they are less motivated to start a company in that context or in that area. and thus that means that their entrepreneurial intentions are lower, and this would be recorded in something like the GEM report then going forward, and it would come up as an issue. So moving from the intentions, the idea that you might want to become an entrepreneur, and moving through to actions, how does corruption affect the behaviours of existing entrepreneurs and business people in contexts? So there is research to suggest that it does have an effect on how businesses operate and entrepreneurs operate in their countries. On a psychological level, when there's corruption in existence, it affects how they feel their company will do. It affects their assumptions on potential success, which actually has a limiting effect then on their decision making, makes them more risk averse and more worried about the implications of what they're doing. So things like political structures, legal structures, and social constraints influence entrepreneurship activities. Thus, corruption as an institutional factor does have an effect on the potential success of our businesses. A good study by Trin et al. In 2012 found that when there was less corruption in their 55 countries that they studied using the GEM report, when there was less corruption on the ground and stronger protection of property rights, the plans and the growth plans of entrepreneurs were more robust, were more ambitious. So that is a good example to show that corruption can really affect the decision making and the actions and the potential outcomes that may occur in these businesses, and which can be problematic over time, and can be quite disappointing for the entrepreneur themselves if they feel if their company had more potential, for example. So in reality, and referring back to the session as part of this module delivered by Rob Gillanders, we look at the founder experience within this. So when there is corruption in a country and someone is starting a business, what does that manifest as? Well, an entrepreneur must consider that if they're going to start a company in a corrupt context, they may have to pay bribes to those issuing licenses and permits. That could be like police officers, tax inspectors, property owners, the list goes on. Corrupt offices may steal profits, the business itself, their investment, or any intellectual property that has been generated. This could also relate to different collaborators or contractors on different projects who may steal content created, may steal contacts. There's a lot of different mechanisms to which that can be affected. Then corrupt courts, so the judicial system, if it is corrupt in the context that this person is operating in, it can make contracting very challenging based on who is linked or who is linked to the corruption, and enforcement of contracts may be then a matter of who you know or what you can afford to pay, how much you engage or become complicit or active within this corrupt system. And unfortunately, there is research to suggest that sexual corruption or sextortion can also be a very damaging consequence to operating a business in a corrupt context as well. So these are all challenging circumstances and very worrying circumstances that a business owner or a business founder may face. And even the market themselves or the competitors may have a role to play in some of this corruption. So there are situations where existing firms that are in the market or in the city or in the context, they may pay corrupt bureaucrats and policymakers to limit entry to their market by erecting legal and regulatory barriers. So they, nearly force founders and new startups out by making the business climate so difficult, so toxic, and so corrupt that their chances of survival or let alone success may be very, very limited. So a number of studies have looked into the effect of corruption on entrepreneurship, and they've each found some really interesting things that add to our knowledge about the intersection of entrepreneurship and corruption, that have both practical implications for how we might support entrepreneurs going forward, and also theoretical and scholarly contributions too. So Dutta and Sobel did quite a robust study of the effect of corruption on entrepreneurship. Before this time, there was some research to indicate that there may be some benefits to corruption in certain contexts for entrepreneurship, and that certain entrepreneurs may benefit from corruption in that grease the wheels situation. They may, in a very damaging business climate that has persistent corruption, someone that may engage also in corruption may benefit or do okay. Prohibition in America would be one of those examples where entrepreneurs in that context would have engaged in bribes for police officials to overlook or to look the other way, and it would have done okay. However, in this large study, Dutta and Sobel kind of refute that, and they say that in every context that they studied, even in those that had very toxic business climates full of corruption, there was a harmful effect of corruption on entrepreneurship, and they recommended that trying to reduce corruption isn't a danger to entrepreneurship. It doesn't rid or it doesn't have a harmful effect if you are trying to reduce corruption. Bologna and Ross in 2015 looked at corruption in terms of Brazilian contexts, and they largely agreed with this idea that corruption in all its forms has a detrimental effect, although they did find some positive effects of corruption in very, very difficult climates, but only a marginal amount. They also found that corruption, unfortunately, has an increasingly negative effect over time. So in the longer term, the effect of corruption on entrepreneurship is extremely detrimental. So this is further validation that corruption has negative impacts. Boudreau et al. 2018 actually studied the effect of the allocation of entrepreneurial talent in the context of a time where the corruption exists. And they found that when corruption increases in the regions that they studied, the resources, the talent, and the flow of kind of founders moved from setting up in industries of professional, technical, education, science services, and industries, and move more firmly into the construction industry. There was a number of reasons for that, one of which was the fact that bribery and property exchange was perceived as easier to engage in corrupt practices than some of the more education, technical services industries there. So largely from this, it's interesting to see that the choice of companies that are formed are affected by corruption, and the situation can be quite dire when corruption exists in a country or in a business context. So moving into the entrepreneurship theory, again, there is work to suggest that you can group entrepreneurs based on their motivation to start. So what was the reason by which they decided to found a business? Dividing this or categorizing this a little bit into two types then, there can be opportunity entrepreneurs. These are those who start a business to exploit unique opportunities, usually led by innovation or personal sense of self-actualization, kind of a pull factor. What this means is that opportunity entrepreneurs decide to start a company because they've had a good idea, they want to exploit an innovation out there. It's something that they choose to do, and despite having maybe perhaps multiple options. So it's something that they prepare for, and they are motivated by, and they step into. Necessity entrepreneurs are those who form businesses out of necessity for income. So they are faced with maybe more problematic or challenging circumstances, and they may have a lack of preparation in doing so, but they are forced, or they find that there are fewer options except for startup. It's a necessity for them to do this as a career choice. So when we examine the two of these in light of corruption, we have some interesting findings. But just to point out that quite intuitively, perhaps the opportunity entrepreneurship, because it is innovation-led, idea-led in a lot of forms, those that engage in this area further their ideas, further their innovations. There is perceived to be more opportunities in this area, and the individuals that are operating, so our entrepreneurs, may have alternatives to make a living. So even in the GEM report, this division between opportunity entrepreneurship and necessity entrepreneurship is asked, with the question in yellow below: are you involved in this startup to take advantage of a business opportunity, or because you have no better choices for work? So that really helps us to see the distinction between the two types. So looking at these two types in the context of corruption, Aldrich et al. 2022 looked at changes in tax rate, corruption, and government expenditure across 52 countries. And what they found was very interesting. They found that corruption's negative effect on opportunity entrepreneurship was twice as strong as its effect on necessity entrepreneurship. That means was with increasing levels of corruption, so more people acting in nefarious ways, making the business climate more challenging. When that was higher, opportunity entrepreneurship reduced. So those that were pursuing startups because they wanted to, decided not to in the more challenging, corrupt context. So it reduced the number of those pursuing entrepreneurship for that reason, and had less of an effect on necessity entrepreneurship. In a sense, those that start a company because they have no other option, their hands are tied. They continue to start their company even if they perceive that there is a more challenging context for them. There is more corruption, there is bribery. They still perhaps have no other options but to try to make a living through starting a shop, starting a business, trying to sell some of the products that they create, perhaps. So, given their usual reduced access to resources and support institutions and potential exposure to sextortion and corruption, necessity entrepreneurs may have fewer options to leave or switch careers. This will be less likely to reduce their entrepreneurial behaviour as compared to opportunity entrepreneurs. This is problematic for a number of reasons, of course. Nobody wants to be forced to start a business or feel like they have no other viable options. That is not an equitable or fair context. Also, in terms of economic wealth for a country, there is a relationship, or there is an association between opportunity or innovation-led entrepreneurship and GDP, while necessity entrepreneurship has the opposite effect or opposite association. So when corruption exists, and this reduces our opportunity or innovation entrepreneurs, potentially our companies that are led by innovation are reduced, which has a downtick in the money that is made for the country and the GDP. So there's a very considerable economic, as well as social, as well as psychological impact of this in the context of entrepreneurship. So to summarize, corruption negatively affects the intention of an individual to start or run a business. Corruption pushes entrepreneurs from productive to destructive activities and changes their focus or industry. Corruption can engage entrepreneurs in or allow them to become complicit with illegal or corrupt practices. They may have to just fall in line with the corruption that exists in order to make do or maintain or continue in their industry. This can manifest as the payment of bribes, or they may in turn have to face extremely challenging business circumstances, or circumstances or outcomes such as sextortion and or other forms of extortion. Corruption fosters more necessity entrepreneurship than opportunity or innovation entrepreneurship, as we just mentioned. So there are many other facets to the examination of corruption in light of this field. These are just a few of the insights that come through. There are many papers that study this, and it is a growing and evolving field for sure. If you have any questions about this, you're welcome to contact me on roisin.lyons@ul.ie. Thanks very much.